Welcome to another edition of Thinking Through the Word. One chapter from one book of the Bible, making our way through the Old Testament right now. We're in the book of Lamentations, written by the prophet Jeremiah after the Babylonian captivity, or the siege of Babylon, which destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC. And now Jeremiah is wandering through the ruins and gives us 5 poems of lament. And at the climax of these poems, right in the middle, number 3, in chapter 3, and so I want to look at a few things from this chapter that basically just show us a contrast between our affliction and God's promises and how we move from one to the other. So let's begin in verse 1, and really verses 1 through 19. I'm going to mark phrase after word that reminds us of the depth of affliction that we can suffer in this life of ours. Bear in mind that God's judgment had brought this affliction on Jerusalem, but also remember that Jeremiah was a righteous prophet who stood for what was right and did all that God asked him to do, and yet he was suffering greatly. And so I think it's fair for us to apply this to all of the trouble that we have in this life. Verse 1, I am the man who has seen affliction, this case under the rod of his wrath. He has been brought into darkness without any light. That's the despair many people feel. He turns his hand again and again against me. Many people articulate that kind of language, the feeling that God has abandoned them. My flesh and my skin waste away, broken bones. Read in the Psalms, and David felt that way under the weight of his sin. Besieged, enveloped with bitterness and tribulation. Again, dwelling in darkness, like the dead. No escape, heavy chains. I call and cry, but there's no answer. Some of you have had dreams where your voice doesn't work when you call out. Well, it's what Jeremiah felt like. My way is blocked. The path seems to have no end. Enemies lying in wait, a bear and a lion. He turned aside my steps, tore me to pieces, made me desolate, bent his bow, set me as a target for his arrow. Some Old Testament language here. Arrow into the kidneys. A devastating blow, a fatal blow in a hunter's language. Laughing stock among the people, taunted. He has filled me with bitterness, wormwood. My teeth grind on gravel. Not a pleasant illustration. Cowering in ashes, destitute or bereft of peace. This is fascinating phrase. I have forgotten what happiness is. My endurance has perished, so has my hope. This is despair. You might call it a spiritual depression. And then beginning to kind of turn a little bit of a corner here in verse 19, this plea, remember, addressed to God. God, remember my affliction, my wanderings. That's all of these previous verses, all that description, affliction and wanderings. And he summarizes it with 2 bitter expressions, wormwood and the gall. This is one of the places in the prophets that we have this expression, wormwood in the gall. We sing it in All Hail the Power of Jesus' name. Sinners whose love can never forget the wormwood and the gall, go spread your trophies at his feet and crown him Lord of all. God, remember. Why? Because my soul remembers it and is bowed down within me. But, word of contrast, this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Just as a cross-reference, go to Psalm 42 and read that and see a similar progression of the bad, and then a period of transition where he talks to himself with truth, and then the hope that carries him forward. But here we see that something is called to mind. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. That's stated as an absolute, not only declarative in the sense of it's stating a point, but it's broadening the quality of this declaration by making it universal. It never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. All of that proving the great faithfulness of God. He goes on to say, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, because this is true, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will hope in him. I will hope in him. I feel like all of verses 1 through 18, but I will hope in him. How can that be? Because this is true. Follow the therefore. Take it back to what has been said before that can lead to such a dogmatic, hope-filled conclusion. Promises continue. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. So it's true that the Lord is good to those who wait, and it is good that they wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It's good that we wait quietly. It's not just good that all the affliction goes away. It's good that we wait for the salvation of the Lord. It's good that we believe him, that we trust him, that we find the Lord to be our portion. Our portion. That's what we need. What do I need in all this affliction? We could begin our list of everything that needs to change, or we can say what I need is my portion. What I need is defined as the Lord. The Lord is what I need, my portion. In these verses, I just want us to remember, it begins with 1 through 18. What are my afflictions? And you could take the rest of your study time, the rest of your day, and literally write them down. What are those things that cause you to feel the way Jeremiah felt, that cause you to say some of the things that sound very much like Jeremiah in Lamentations 3? This is the bad, the afflictions. But then, beginning in the transition of verse 19, and we're stopping at verse 26, we're asking, what are God's promises? This is the good. The promises of God. But the next question is, How do we move from that state of affliction and discouragement to resting in God's promises? And I think the answer begins in verse 21 with the phrase, call to mind. We call to mind. The idea is you remind yourself, you counsel yourself, you teach yourself, you rebuke yourself, you encourage yourself. You make sure that you're thinking rightly, that you're not just focused on circumstances, but you are focused on the promises of God. So you call to mind. And what do you call to mind? Verse 24. The Lord is my portion. And the great challenge of this text is, will we believe this? Will we take God at his word? Do we have faith in what God has promised? The Lord is my portion. Is God enough for me? And if I wrestle with that and believe it by faith, then I too can say, in the midst of affliction, and long before anything gets better, I can say what Jeremiah says, if the Lord is my portion, therefore I will hope. And those bold words, those words of resolve, those words of confidence and faith are words that are spoken in the midst of affliction. But they are words that are spoken because of God's promise. We can move from the despair of our affliction to the hope of God's promise by faith, believing God's words to us that he will be our portion. So grace and peace to you this week, and hope for the afflictions of COVID, for the afflictions of physical illness, for the affliction of financial distress, for the affliction of chastening, for the affliction of all the heartaches of this life. God is enough. God is enough.